All right, we're on.
Okay. Hi, I'm Frank Reese from Cappella Books. Welcome to another in our series of conversations with some of our favorite authors. Tonight, award-winning novelist, creative writing instructor, and essayist Mitchell Jackson will be discussing the most recent novel by the incomparable James McBride, Deacon King Kong. Before turning it over to these gentlemen, I want to take advantage of having James McBride with us to make a couple of shameless plugs and also share a family story, which I think resonates far beyond that. Like most of you, I'm sure I'm a huge fan of James McBride's fiction and his memoir, but perhaps my favorite book of his is his biography of James Brown, Kill 'Em and Leave. If you haven't read that yet, do yourself a favor and check it out. And speaking of biographies of the architects of American music, I want to invite you all to join us here on Zoom next Thursday night, August 27th at 7 p.m. as Atlanta music journalist Chad Radford interviews Mark Grabowski about his new book, The Big Life of Little Richard. And please check out all of our other upcoming events at acapellabooks.com. Second plug, you may notice the copy of Deacon King Kong behind me. It is a signed first edition. This was Acapella's signed first editions club selection this past March, and we still have copies available. You can still order one and learn more about our signed first editions club at acapellabooks.com. Now for the family story. My dad was born in Mobile, Alabama in 1935. Not exactly the center of progressive racial attitudes. Through his first 50 years or so, he lived his life about as you would expect someone of his station and upbringing, being a good Chamber of Commerce Republican, which in the Alabama of George Wallace wasn't the worst thing to be, but still. After I opened Acapella in 1989, my dad got the book bug and ever since has owned the Alabama Booksmith in Birmingham. If there were a poster child for how books can open up a person's mind like nothing else, my dad would be it. Hopefully from a side angle so all could see his pride and joy, his ponytail. Of all the authors he has bonded with through the years, his friendship with James McBride has been among the strongest. When my dad turned 80, James, who of course is a wonderful musician as well as a wonderful writer, serenaded him. My dad turned 85 this year, and before the world shut down, James was planning a traditional book tour, and his publisher was not planning to send him to Birmingham to sign books for the Alabama Booksmith, but James put his foot down and insisted. Unfortunately, that plan changed, but I'm so glad that all these months later, the Reese family gets to extend a warm welcome to one of our very favorite and most influential friends, James McBride. This is the first time we've gotten to work with Mitchell Jackson, but we're so appreciative that he was available for this conversation tonight. While they're talking, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and Mitchell will ask some of yours after James after he has asked all of his own. And then I'll come back at the end to say goodnight. But now please welcome Mitchell Jackson and James McBride.
Hey.
How you doing, Mitchell? It's good.
I'm all right, man. Yeah, good to see you too. No, man, I was actually thinking about, and I don't know if you remember this, but when we met, I don't know if it's when we met, but it's the time that I remember meeting you was at that T Magazine shoot.
Yeah.
For the, I think it's like 40 Black writers or something. Yeah. And I remember being like in awe that all of these great writers were in the room. I mean, it was like you, Ishmael Reed, were sitting down, like Yusuf Komunyakaa. And there was a moment at which you pulled like the baby OGs or the young Gs to the side and you had us all circled up. You were like sitting in the middle of a circle of a bunch, maybe like 10 or 12 young Black male writers. You was like, all right, let me talk to y'all for a second. Let me like tell you what it is. And I just remember thinking like how gracious that was, because there was a lot of OGs in the room, but no one else pulled us all aside and kind of gave us a kind of Vince Lombardi talk, which made me think about the kind of advice that you had and the kind of experiences you had. So my first question is, I think this is the third or fourth novel. I know you've written in many different genres, but I'll just stick to novels. And what is it that you kind of learned in the first one that you carried over? You know, what did you learn in Good Lord Bird that you kind of carried on to Deacon? Because I'm really interested in, like, your kind of savvy advice.
Well, I think I remember that meeting in New York. I was really impressed to see so many talented young writers there, and I don't really get the chance to meet many writers of any color, so it was nice to see so many young writers, and particularly so many young Black guys and it was all men, I think.
Yeah,
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 and it was really nice to see so many. I don't know, pleasant, kind, gentle people in the same room, because the stereotype, of course, that exists with us, at least before George Floyd was murdered, was that, we're tough and we're playing basketball and we're slam dunking and we're chest thumping, and uh, Black men are like any kind of human being. They're fully dimensional. So it was nice to see so many talented young men and so many talented I got such special pleasure of seeing so many young gay Black writers, because they have a hard time. Anyway, it's really about after for a writer at your skill set level, there's not much I can teach you that experience won't. But I would say that if I had to counsel a young writer of any stripe or color, I'd say story entry point really is the key to making making characters effective. Because story entry point, most writers who write novels have some idea. I want to write a book about a woman I want a book about a man who, a book about a child who, and so you have this character in your head, but where you land, or where the voice of that story lands, whether in first person, third person, is really important in terms of getting it into orbit.
yeah,
So I would focus, I think what I've learned in my, years of writing is that that where you land in a story, where you come in, is important, because you have to give yourself space to go forwards and backwards and sideways. You can't
yeah,
you can't drive the thing forward if there's no room for the character to be manipulated, or to manipulate him or herself.
yeah. I mean, I thought that I can see that really working or put to use in this book, because of the way that you enter the book. I mean, it's so early on. I don't think I'm giving it away to say that there's some violence that happens early on in the beginning, and you kind of where it's going. At least I did. But then there are all these kind of, like you say, forward and backwards in different ways. And I wondered also, like, was that an entry point that you knew about going in, or did you just think, like, I want to write about this kind of deacon
Well,
who
I mean,
drinks a little bit?
Deacon King Kong is really about a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I needed to be able to get into that neighborhood. I needed to get the reader into that neighborhood, but in a way that that was quick, and that was also kind of humorous, because it's a funny book. I mean, it
Yeah.
has serious moments, but essentially it's a book of sort of a book about a community that I loved and respect and so forth. And where supposed to Good Lord Bird was a book of caricature. It was a book of comedy as well, but it was a lot of yarn stretching. I couldn't think of a way. What I did in Deacon King Kong was I explored the relationship between this boy and this man.
Yeah.
And then I pushed the conflict into the story, and then I allowed the waves of that to cascade out, so that we could see the rest of the community. Because it begins in a housing project, but then we see the Italians, and we see the Irish, and we see the others from the perspectives of the housing project, as opposed to how it's often seen the other way around. So one of the things that your book does, your first book anyway, and I don't know if there's a second, but your first book does that very well. You see the community from the inside out, as opposed to the outside in. So I didn't really, you know, that book begins with a shooting, but the person who shot doesn't die.
Right. Yeah.
It's just that the effects of it cascade into the community. It allows me as the writer and allows the readers to visit all these different people as they, you know, harp on or affected by or think about or try to get away from this particular business.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens is the characters will show you the entry point. In this case, the character of Deacon King Kong is an old deacon who you know, he gets drunk all the time, and he's at church. Yeah. He's preaching his first sermon, and he's basically like, you know, every alcoholic relative we've ever had who does stuff we still love. Right. But he reaches a breaking point, and I enter the story at that breaking point.
Yeah.
And his breaking point, it just kind of happens, and that breaking point just it rides right through the rift in the community that exists at that period of time.
Yeah. I was really, really interested in the names of so many of these characters, not just Deacon, but you know, like Sausage. They're just so, and it's also, they don't just have one nickname. Some people have like 2 and 3 different nicknames, and they have an alias. And it made me think about that that kind of Latin proverb that your name is your destiny. And so I wondered, is that something that you thought about, like writing or giving a character a name in such a way that it kind of foretold what was going to happen to them? And if not, then how did you go about coming up with some of those names?
No, I never thought about that. And I would urge you not to do that, because the minute you start to intellectualize, you're dead. Creativity goes out the window, you know. They were just funny names of people that I've known or thought I've known or have met, or I actually knew a hot sausage, you know. Every community has its, you know, wacky names. African-American life that's just full of them. I like the old names better than the new. You know, I mean, I still work at my church in Brooklyn, and I know all kinds of kids of crazy, stupid names. You know, I mean, sometimes these parents, they must be drunk, man. They give these names, I mean, you know, and then the kid's stuck with it. I know a kid named Prince, Royal Prince. His name is Royal Prince. I'm Unique. I mean, why would you give a kid a name, I'm Unique? I mean, that's so stupid. And, you know, all his life he's got to go. So I just, they just were, you know, they just came, you know, into my imagination, I suppose. I know a lot of people who had pretty weird names. You know, I guess in New York, you know, it's just, I don't know. I mean, you go down south, you really hear some wild names.
Yeah. Speaking of down south, a lot of this book, most of the kind of grown characters in the book, they come from the South. So they're like, really, they're Great Migration Black people. And I also wonder how kind of thinking about the Great Migration shaped how you put this story together.
Well, most of the Black people I knew in New York coming up were from, their parents were like mine. They were from the South. My mother was originally from Poland, but she grew up in Virginia, and my father was from North Carolina. My stepfather was from Virginia. So most of the people I know, their parents were from the South. Everyone's parents was from Alabama, Tennessee, the Carolinas, you know, Florida. So that had a big effect on African-American life in New York, because the generation that followed them wanted mostly nothing to do with the South. Everybody I knew, you know, we had to go down south. I mean, you know, some people like to go down south, but some other people didn't want to go, you know. And you went down south and you saw your relatives, and they were like really poor. Like, we were considered poor by New York standards, and we'd go down south to see our relatives, and they were like really poor, like, you know, a light bulb hanging from the ceiling. You could see the outside from, you know, outhouses and stuff. We were like, they're really poor. But that influence had an enormous amount of effect on New York life, I think. It's very rarely visited in the literary world. and I think because, you know, writers got involved in the New York world or in the northern world, and I mean, some of it's visited, but I like it.
Yeah.
You know.
The projects, they have the nickname of the cause, and then they all congregate at a place called the flagpole, and then there's a church, the 5 Point Church. And again, I was thinking about these kind of names that you had. It seemed like the cause was, maybe it's a place that, you know, was in your kind of in your history, but it seemed very much like it was saying something about what was happening in this story. Is that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the cause is a fictional name.
Mm-hmm.
But how many times have we, you know, been visited by the rhetoric of something that's supposed to be great? That's, you know, the cause, the freedom houses, you know, how many times have we been at a park that some rich company, you know, tosses a few, shillings at the black community and builds a basketball court, and they call it, you know, the Hope Park.
Yeah.
And then that's where all the crack is sold. You know, I mean, it was intentional to call it the cause houses because, you know, the cause is such a big thing. You know, you're supposed to be down with the cause and all that.
Yeah.
You know, and that I always thought it was kind of fun. I mean, it was good to make fun of it in a good-natured and not negative way.
Yeah. There's one of the people that lives in the cause is a guy that really resonates with me, and it's this guy named Deems. So Deems is the one that Deacon shoots for everyone else. Deems is a young guy. He's a teenager. He's like a really good athlete, but he's also figured out that he can make some money selling dope, and he's kind of committed to selling dope. And there's a point at which two of the kind of mob types are talking about Deems, and then they call him, I think they say like, yeah, he's really smart. He's like a whiz kid, and then he's like a really good kid. And then one of the other guys says, well, if he's such a good kid, like, why don't you give him one of those Negro scholarships or something? And that made me think about the kind of narrow paths that sometimes we have coming out of the projects, where it's like you can really be good at sports, or you can go get this pack. And it really made me think about also, like, when I was coming up in the 80s or 90s, that they had the idea of the predator. The black male, as young black male, is a what do they call them? The social predator, I think it was. And the way that Deems is described is kind of like that, right? Like he'll do anything to anyone. He has like a long memory about people wronging him. He's maybe shot some people or not. And I wonder, like, what it was that you were telling us about that. And maybe it's just that, you know, we're all human beings, but I really thought a lot about Deems as a character.
Well, I mean, you know, anyone who has lived in Black America for any length of time understands that there's really, really not much that separates the ones who go to college and have opportunity and the ones who don't. It usually has to do with your family and you know, and your mother or your father or your mother, or whoever's taking care of you, making sure you don't answering the hundreds of questions that need to be answered over the course of your life from the age of, you know, 3 to 17 when you're being shaped into a person. Deems is representative. He represents a whole legion of men, African American and Latino or Latinx, whatever you want to call them, Hispanic men and women who are really smart, who really deserve better, but for whatever reason, for a myriad of reasons, go wrong. The stereotypical view of the mafioso drug dealer was cleanly and cleverly and extraordinarily, with extraordinary skill, drawn out and expanded by Mario Puzo when he wrote The Godfather. So that you came away from reading the book and or seeing the film, if you saw the film, at least the first one, that there was really no choice for these people. Either these Italians would end up sweeping floors, or since politicians were crooks, they would be crooks too, and they would make their way that way. That's romanticized. But when an African American does it, you know, he's a wolf pack, he's a thug, because there's no room for mistakes. There's no room for that kind of, at least, you know, in my lifetime, there's been very little room for the discourse on a Black person's humanity when it comes to, going back to that New York Times photo shoot. The reason why I enjoyed it so much, and I hate doing that kind of stuff. I don't really like being around. I mean, I ain't one of them kinds of cats that like to sit around and talk a lot of stuff about, you know, whose book you like and all that, because inevitably it gets into, well, I didn't like his book, you know.
Yeah.
If you write a book, you're like an NBA player. You know, you're good enough to get in the league, then you're good.
Yeah.
But one of the nice things about it was to see so many smart young Black men in the same place.
Yeah.
Who you could have a conversation with, and I mean, like, I can have a conversation anyway, but who were trying to accomplish something and who were being recognized for it.
Yeah.
And for those men to be standing in that room as writers of books said a lot about who they were, because especially for the young men in your generation, because it's a lot harder now, I think, to grow up as a Black man in this country than it was when I was a kid. Because now you make one mistake. I mean, we know what the police do and have done. You know, we all know that. But the drugs are so powerful, and the sort of martial law that exists in this militarized zone known as America is really quite punishing when it comes to African Americans, and also the hip hop culture that has sort of become industrial strength violence and violence toward men and women has become part of the culture. I mean, when I was a kid, we wanted to be clean with suits and ties. I mean, we wanted to always look good. We didn't adopt the prison culture that's part of the popular rap music vocabulary. Now, that's not to say it's not great music. It's not to say the great artists are doing, that the artists who are doing it are not. They are. That is the new jazz. It is the great music of our time. But a lot of the social mores that are associated with it have been adopted by the young, and not just Blacks. And there's a lot wrong with that.
Yeah. You do a really good job of describing the projects, not just the projects, but like the way that the people that live there, the way that the police it, the way that people see it. So there's a line that I used to teach in this essay by Baldwin, Fifth Avenue Uptown, where he says, the projects in Harlem are hated. They are hated almost as much as policemen, and this is saying a great deal. And they are hated for the same reason. Both reveal unbearably the real attitude of the white world. And then there's a line from my favorite character in the book is Sister G. I really like her because she's like the old, wise woman. She hasn't been like, I mean, she's had life experience, but I don't think she's like worn down all the way by that experience. So Sister G has a line where she says, talking to Potts, the police officer, she says, why we got to have the police around every time we had a simple party? Y'all do watch out for us. He said, y'all don't watch out for us, y'all watch over us. And when I read that line, I immediately thought back to that Baldwin line about, the real attitude of the white world. So I wondered if you see any echoes between this idea that you wrote about, the police they're not watching over us. They're not watching out for us, they're watching over us. And then Baldwin's idea about the white world is the kind of definition of how they police the projects.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, that hasn't changed that much. It got a little bit better, then it got a lot worse, and then it just kept getting worse. there are a lot of good police in the projects that work in New York anyway. But unfortunately, the unions have become so powerful that, and the hiring principles of the cops, at least in New York, have changed so much that even if a cop is good, he suffers for being a good person. And in addition, there's so many guns now, nobody knows who to trust. So the lack of trust between the community and the police has always been an issue. And that unfortunately continues and was exacerbated by, who. So it's really hard to feel free when every time a police wagon rolls past, you feel like they're watching you. On the other hand, you have a great need for their expertise and protection. Both sides are really in a disadvantaged position. Look, I've had my issues with the police, believe me. And as a father, every time my son leaves the house, I'm just hoping that But the real truth is that imagine a car that's running, an old '65 Plymouth or something, and imagine putting your mouth on the tailpipe, and just that's your job. That's what the cops have to do. So I don't absolve them of the guilt of doing some of the cruel things they did and have done, but on the other hand, we need to think about fixing that car too, because that's really the part of the problem. Because the car, because we get the worst of it. We get the pollution from the tailpipe, and then we get the guy who had to eat the pollution.
Yeah,
that means by the time they get to us, they're pretty pissed off.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to show in Deacon King Kong is that despite these troubles, the Black community is a really happy place.
Yeah.
It's a place where people find happiness despite the difficulties. Because I'm so tired of reading books and seeing movies where we're all, and waiting for Maya Angelou to show up and give you a few words to make you feel better, and then you go home and you go, nah, I don't really think it's that way. It's a community that is as disparate and as involved and as fully dimensional as anywhere else. It just so happens that the people are living in circumstances that are not housing circumstances that really shouldn't exist. I mean, anyone who's seen a New York City housing project, I mean, it's the most dehumanizing.
Yeah.
These big red buildings, and in a lot of cases now in New York, at least before this pandemic, the housing projects would be surrounded by $1 million homes,
Yeah.
and the people would be less safe then than they were before.
Right.
So my job, and I think the job of every good writer is to show, good African-American writer especially, is to show how things work or can work, as opposed to show what's wrong. You show what's wrong, you're just writing another book. This is wrong, and but if you show how people manage to maintain their humanity and their dignity and their humor, well, then you see why blacks, why the Black community is still exists and still managed to maintain itself.
Yeah. You were talking about your son. I have a son as well, and he is always telling me I'm like what my generation is and how his generation knows everything. And there's a line in there where Elephant is talking to his mother, and she says, "Nothing is the way it was. You ever see a son as good as his father? The son might be taller or stronger or thicker about the shoulders, but is he better?" And I thought about that idea, that because I know that every son believes that usually a son believes that he's better than his father, but this idea that no man really exceeds their father. And I wondered about what you think about that idea and how it kind of plays out over this book.
Well, the woman who's saying that is an Italian American, quote unquote, immigrant, and she's saying that to her Italian son.
Yeah.
That same conversation is had in every kind of family of all types. I think there's a certain truth to that, but there's another side to that we need to consider, and that is that the criteria for what was good when she was a young woman,
yes,
has changed. So it's really not fair to compare. So like comparing, Muhammad Ali to Joe Louis or I don't know, Susan B. Anthony to Helen Gurley Brown or Harriet Tubman. It's just not possible. Everything lives in its own time. Everything happens within its own framework. So what I tried to show in that scene, and what I tried to show in this book, is that if we hold each other to the same criteria as everyone else in our time, then it's okay. But if you start comparing eras, it's probably not a good idea. All of my work is aimed at trying to show that we're pretty much alike, which is telling the same story with different skins. Now, some people just don't want to hear that because the mythology that people accept as identity can screw you up pretty bad, I mean, it's just, you have to decide what mythology you want to accept as your history. Because if it gives you great pride that, for example, that Black people can dance and white people can't, then something's wrong with you. Because there's plenty of white folks that can dance. You ain't going to catch me clogging on a Saturday. That's what floats your boat,
Yeah.
Who am I to judge,
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so I was thinking there seems to be one constant in this book, and it's also connected to Elephant, but it's his father this time. And he says, everything you are, everything you will be in this cruel world depends on your word. A man who not keep his word is worthless. And I wondered if you think that is a constant, and if you might even want to take that out now and you can kind of put it in a realm of maybe politics even. But that seems like one thing across generations that might hold true.
Well, it holds true in a good family, in a mother or a father or a grandparent or a cousin who's raising a kid, who will say that. And if they make that come across, they've given the kid, the person there, they've given them something to work with. One of the problems that we have now in American society, in addition, one is that we don't have a lot of local news. But the second is that, and that's just one, because nobody knows what's happening in the next county over because there's no local paper or no one's reading anymore. But the other thing is this whole business of anonymous, internet chit chats where you could just sit at home and eat a bunch of Twinkies and just chat away and give your opinion about bullshit. I think if you write your review about something or you write a letter to the editor or whatever, you should sign your name. And if the organization shouldn't print your stuff unless you sign your name and say who you are. Otherwise, you just become another blogger who's just yakking away about nothing because we haven't learned to edit ourselves. We used to have to edit ourselves. You had an idea, you wanted to write a letter to the editor or something, you thought about it for a couple of days. Now you tweet 140 characters, like ding dong in the White House there. You just tweet, and what happens though, and this is important to remember, is that as you tweet and blog and, blather and blither and tell everybody you ate a tuna fish sandwich and show your new bathing suit off and on, you lose power every time. Your words become less and less powerful. And after a while, you're like a person who has no power because you've used it. You've emptied your gun, pardon the violent metaphor. Mm-hmm. You don't have anything left. Words are important and they should be chosen carefully. And if you can't say something about someone while they're in the same room, you probably ought not to say it. So.
Yeah, some more wisdom. This church I imagined, I used to be, I went to some of those churches. I grew up on the West Coast, but we had them too because everybody on the West Coast is also from the South. And, going into kind of like a storefront church, they got the one drum set and the organ. But I also think that this book is saying some really interesting things about the way that church works in our life, the way that religion works. I mean, there's admission by my favorite character, G, about like, yeah, we got everything going on in this place that people would have in any other kind of institution. So I wonder, what were you saying to us about maybe the role of the Black church, but just the way also that religion kind of plays out in especially in life in the 1960s, which this book is set in the late 1960s.
Well, I'm still a member of my church. The church my parents started in Brooklyn. It's a little tiny church, and we have our problems. We have our issues, certainly. And the church's inability to change has really hurt it, at least in the Black church, because you can't conduct church now like you conducted it in the 1960s. There's just too much societal influence that kids are affected by, and also the preaching has become diluted in the 1950s and 60s and even the 70s. A lot of the preachers were people who couldn't go to school because they just were prevented by it, or they couldn't get into college, or they didn't have the money, or so they became ministers, and so they were really thoughtful, and and just the pool of preachers was better. Now that's not the case. Some of these guys, some of them are just knuckleheads. I mean, and a lot of sexism and the whole, whatever you see in society, you see in church. All that said, it's still better than nothing. And I wanted to show that there's a lot of disagreement in the church. There's a lot of discord and, ridiculous henpecking and, provincialism. But ultimately, in a good church, which this church that is in this book and my own church, in a good church, people try to do their best.
Yeah.
And that says a lot when people have no money. In the book, they're going on about the Christmas club money, some of it's missing, and they think, they think the old deacon stole it. And, they're going, because, that this is real money, and people had none. Right. So people trying to do the right thing should not be poked fun of. And I've always felt for many years that the depiction of Black women as bozos going around shaking their hips like, you bet, it's just so wrong. Especially church women, because they're the most sophisticated. Most of them hold the church up. They're the ones that they do all the work. And they're very sophisticated about what to say and what not to say. They're very clever. They have the dexterity. They have when it comes to the church and what needs to be done in terms of the human comedy, they have the guts of cat burglars, and they have the guile of a fox. They know exactly what to say, when to say it, what not to say. They're really, really clever. They're not just women walking around wigs and with hands on their hips saying, you better not do that. I can't stand that kind of stereotypical view of these women. So, and a lot of them come out of the church. So I wanted to present the church as a dynamic place rather than just a place where people just get together and, shout and sing and so forth.
Yeah, that reminds me, and I'll ask one more question before I open it up, because we got some questions from the audience too. Is Sister G is living in the 1960s, and she seems to me to have like a really sober attitude about, like, she's under no illusions about her world. And I wonder if you think, yesterday people were talking a lot about, Michelle Obama's speech at the convention, and obviously Kamala Harris is the vice president-elect of Biden. So I wonder, do you think that she could imagine that in the time of this book, that she could have envisioned that these two Black women would be where they are?
Well, I hope that Kamala Harris is the vice president-elect. She's vice president. She's vice president select.
Yeah.
She's the vice president-elect.
Yeah.
I thought the first lady, the former first lady's words were wonderful. I like her. I don't like politics very much.
Yeah.
but she spoke very effectively about what needs to happen in November. And I think Kamala Harris is the kind of woman that we can all stand behind. You can tell when you saw her at the Brett Kavanaugh hearing, she really
Yeah.
reflected a lot of the impatience that we all had with the absurdity
Yeah.
of this crook who's running the country. I mean, she has a lot of guts, and I think, I mean, did I imagine that black women? I don't know. I can tell you this much. When Sonny Rollins and all these cats were making up jazz in the 30s and 40s and 50s, the music that the music, none of them made any money doing it. And nobody imagined what would happen, but that music is going around the world. I have a book of Sonny Rollins solos on the piano that, he did that. It took him, took him what? I think the song St. Thomas is 2 minutes and 40 seconds long. And people, they analyze that solo now for years, and in colleges all across the world, universities all across the world. Nobody imagined that these guys, named Charlie Parker and Sonny Rollins and John Coltrane and Miles Davis and, Red Garland would be studied in Germany and Sweden and Switzerland and Australia. They just did it because it was part of the struggle. And the struggle made them strong, and it made their art last forever. And so what Michelle Obama and Kamala Harris represent, they represent struggle. And the struggle has made them into unique, powerful human beings. They could be colored purple with orange hair and have, different colored eyeballs. They'd still be almost powerful beyond measure because they're created by struggle. And so you can't help but to follow them and say, wow, they are great people. So I was really quite moved by Mrs. Obama's talk. And I think Kamala Harris, despite her, some of the things that she's done in the past that I strongly disagree with, I think she's going to be I think the Biden ticket is fantastic. He's going to win. And then we can start the process of rebuilding this country the way it needs to be, the way it needs to happen.
I have a few questions from the audience. Looks like Stephanie has a question for us. Are you one of the characters in the book? I guess she's really asking which of the characters is most like you if you're not a particular character.
I'm assuming she means Deacon King Kong.
Yes.
I'm like none of them, I'm like none of them really. I was just a witness to their, you have to remember, I grew up in the church, so I knew a lot of these people in and out of church, and they were like relatives to me almost, some of them, I was close to some of them, close to a lot of them, still close to the ones who are still living, but I'm not in there. If I was anybody, I'd be Deems,
Deems. Yeah. Okay. There's another question is from Sharon. Did you intend this to be a love story between Sport Coat and Hetty? What did you intend to convey through their relationship?
Well, I knew that at some point Hetty would have to show who she was before she came to New York, before she became the kind of caricature of a nitpicking, disappointed housewife. And when I reached the younger Hetty, she was just beautiful. It meant a lot to me that she came back later in the narrative as the beautiful, just naive young country girl that she was, riding on her father's pony, and she loved flowers, she loved plants, and that's why she loved them. And that really was not me. That was just in the room, it just, that's just in the room. That's God coughing, and you being the one in the room with a handkerchief. That's just, and it was great. It made the book, that relationship, Hetty and Sport Coat, and then Sister G and Potts.
Yeah.
Really is the spinal cord of that book, because love is everything,
Yeah.
That's why we all get out of bed, you know. Love, man. You know, just love somebody. I mean, how hard can that be?
Well, hard. According to Potts and Sister G and Hetty, they was all going through it.
Yeah. But it's a good hard though. You know, it's
Yeah.
a good hard. And it's a well fought war for love, you know, which
Yeah.
makes it worth it, you know. Yeah.
Let me see here. I have, let's see, Q&A box. So one person wants to know, they grew up, I guess, in Red Hook, and it seems like this book is set in Red Hook, though there's kind of imaginary project name. So where did you imagine this book was set?
They just said it.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when I visit a place in my mind, in my imagination, I only see it in black and white. So I have to add the color to things after. Everything is black and white. There's nothing in color.
Mm.
When I imagine characters moving around and they start to move around on the page, I don't see. It's not that I don't see the color. It's just there's no color. It's just tones of gray.
Mm.
It's in my imagination. I had Red Hook to work with because I know Red Hook, but it quickly expanded out very, very quickly when I had to move out of the project. So then what happens is you end up defacing buildings and redrawing them. You know, you even sketch, I don't know if I did this or not, but in the past, I've actually sketched out places. I know I did it with the Lord Burger. I drew the place so I could see it right. In the cause, it wasn't that hard because the big objects, the flagpole, the bench, the church, the Silver Street, Slag Street, where you know, where the cop is doing the chasing and all this business. That's all. That's not a lot of places in Deacon King Kong. Deacon King Kong is a journey of. It's basically a chase, you know, because everyone's trying to, you know, get the sport coat, you know.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, Red Hook was the beginning point in terms of imagination. Yeah.
I had a question about, he's a minor character, but he's, and I'm forgetting his name. I think it started with a J, but he's the police officer, the black police officer that's working in.
Oh, Jet.
Jet, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, Jet's touted as the first black detective, I believe. And then when he leaves, he becomes the first black elsewhere. And it made me think about this idea, you know, especially now with the, you know, Kamala, about the first black so-and-so, and what, if anything, you were kind of saying about that, or what is your perspective on the first black so-and-so?
I was just playing with it. You know, he was the first black cop, the first black detective, first black undercover, first black trombone player at PS9, first black mechanic for the police, first this, first that. And he's a ding dong, you know.
Yeah.
And his white partner, you know, the cop that's training him and tells him, you know, you're an idiot, man. You know, who cares? So I wanted to kind of bring that up. It means something, I think. Usually it's a more painful journey to be the first this, that, or the other when you're African American in this country. But at some point, you know, you just better be good. But I wanted to bring it up, which I thought it was just funny, you know.
Okay. Maybe, I don't know, maybe two more questions. I think this is an important question because you are so accomplished, you know. This person, Aaron, wants to know what accomplishment has meant the most to you.
My son is going to college. My youngest boy, I'm divorced. My youngest boy has been with me for the last few years, and he's going to college on Sunday, and I'm really proud of that. That's probably my best accomplishment in the past few years. I also run a program in my church to teach music to kids on the weekends, and my son, who's upstairs, he does that too in my family's church, and he's done it for several years, getting up at 5:30 in the morning and driving into Brooklyn to work until about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And he's done it without complaint for years, and he's gotten a lot out of it. So, I mean, everything that I've earned is just because God just decided that he was going to just bless me. That's really how that worked. I mean, I work hard. I wake up every day at 4. These days it's been 5.
Wow.
And I hit it. I don't sit around and bullshit. I don't go to dinners and I'm not interested in that. It was a short time to live. You got to I'm very concerned about my community, but I am beyond the point where I want to sit around and talk about problems. I'm interested only in solutions. I am not interested in talking about I don't want to hear about Malcolm and Martin. Tell me that when you're teaching somebody, but I don't want to hear rhetoric and bullshit. I don't want to see T-shirts and all this. I don't want to hear none of that. Get to work. Otherwise, I just walk out the room. I mean, when I worked with Spike Lee, we did Miracle at St. Anna, which is a great movie that probably 8 people saw it. One of the things that was most interesting about that was when I would text Spike at 4:00 in the morning, he would always respond. He would be up working. I never saw a guy who worked harder. Jacob, Frank's father, and the guy still works. Yeah. And I respect that, and he works at the right stuff. So if you work at the right stuff, then it doesn't matter. That's your reward. That's the greatest reward in the world. And I mean that, because if I had not had that attitude, I'd still be writing for a newspaper someplace. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
But at a certain point, I just said, I can't deal with this negativity all the time. I have to do something else. I have to do something that's positive, that helps me grow and helps other people grow.
I think it would be fitting, because this book is so funny. One of the questions here is, what do you think is the funniest moment in this book? I imagine you got a lot to pick from, but I'll be interested in knowing that too. This is, Brenda wants to know this.
Well, Brenda, probably. I mean, there's a lot of funny moments in the book, and this book has been optioned for TV as well. So, and I'm writing that script too. So I'm with these characters a lot. I would say the funniest. I don't know. One of the funniest sections of the book is when Sportcoat meets Sister Paul at the nursing home.
Oh yeah.
And she looks at him and they start woofing on each other,
She reads him quick, yeah.
She reads him quick. She jumps into him and starts saying how ugly he is.
Yeah. Yeah. And meanwhile, you described her as like, she's she got like 1 tooth.
Yeah. She's quite a dish herself. Yeah. Yeah. That's I enjoyed that. I always enjoyed looking at old people and listening to them talk, because they're so funny. They have so much to say. So that's probably one of my favorite sections of the book.
Okay. All right. There was one question up there that said, I guess it's hard to think about legacy, but she wanted to know, what do you most want to be remembered for, your musical legacy or your literary legacy?
Well, I haven't done anything musically that anyone knows about that's any good, really. I mean, I wrote the score for a musical called Bobos that should have been produced in the 80s. It was a hip hop musical. I don't think anybody, I mean, my musical life's not done yet. Now that my son's going to school, maybe I'll have time to start playing and composing seriously. So I'm sure I'll be remembered more, if I'll be remembered at all, as a writer, which is fine. I mean, I'm lucky because I get to, I found a way to make a living at the things I really like to do. And and I've done it, and I've just been fortunate that that it's kind of happened that way for me. I mean, I work hard, but I've always tried to just not to be right, to do right by people and respect people. And I meet people who give me so much. I mean, Frank talked about his father. I really do like. I mean, his father's an amazing guy. I mean, I get to go there and sell books, but then I get to sit down with his father and listen to his father talk. And I learned so much from this, who then was 80, now he's 85. I learned so much from him. And whatever gifts he has to give to the world, it's not in his books. It's in his life experience and in his kindness, and in his intelligence. And so, if you're smart enough to just recognize everybody on their own ground and let them have their own song, you'll glean a lot from people. I mean, the magic of Black Americans is this: we have so much to give. We're such a trusting people. I mean, African Americans are like, I mean, I don't want to insult people, but Jewish Americans are very giving people. Now, if you're Irish, don't get pissed off, okay? If you're Italian, all right, write a letter to the editor. But these two groups I know, they are just giving people. Now, I know other people are giving, but I just talking about the two groups that I've had experience with.
Yeah.
Now, if you're wise, you'll just sit there and you'll accept the gifts that come to you from the people who, at least in my life, that I've had the opportunity to meet. I don't want to insult anybody now, because other groups are very giving. Latinos giving, very good giving, and it's part of African culture to give and so forth. I'm just talking about my experience. So I've been lucky enough to meet people who are giving, and I've been smart enough to keep my mouth shut and let them, and not move and allow them to give. And then when it's my turn to give, I have something to give, and I have responsibility to give, and it really works out for you in the end.
Yeah. Well, man, I really appreciate you letting us listen to your song today. Got a lot out of this. I got a lot of marks in my book, and hopefully I'll get to see you at another one of those things and get another one of your Vince Lombardi talks.
Well, I hope so. I'm very highly commended for putting up with me this long period of time, but I appreciate your kindness and I wish you the best. I hope to see you again soon.
All right, you too.
Okay. So who's whispering in the background?
Yeah, that's us. But I can't get my video back, so I'm going to just talk to you. Thank you both so much. This was a great way to start our evening. That we're going to finish up watching Stacey Abrams in another hour or so. I will say, and I'm sorry I can't. Well, I can see y'all, but you can't see me. There's not much good to say about this pandemic, but one of the real great rewards has been evenings like this, and I can't say enough about how generous you two have been with your time to share it with us. And again, Mitchell Jackson, James McBride, thank you so much, and thank you all out there for joining us.
All right.
All right.
Have a good one.
Mitchell, take care.
All right, you too, man.
See you later.
All right.
Bye.